The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome everyone, and I hope everyone is nice and warm with a lovely hot cup of tea as we get ready for spending an hour together to discuss the 2019 Maryland Legislative Preview. I'm Mary Amara, the Executive Director of the Department of Special Needs Ministries.
And I am Rachel Chung, Coordinator for Disability Ministry for the Archdiocese of Washington.
Rachel and I will talk through some advocacy tips and then some specific legislation that will impact the disability community during 2019. At the end of the webinar, we'll open the floor for your questions and comments. If you look along the sidebar of your screen, you'll see a section that is marked Chat. Please feel free to ask any question or make any comment during this webinar, and we will save time at the end to share them. Again, the section is marked Chat, and it's in the sidebar of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the State of Maryland's 2019 legislative session. Here are some key dates to remember as we are looking forward to another year and another list of bills. On January 9th of 2019, our legislative session started. On the 16th, we had the inauguration of Governor Hogan and Lieutenant Governor Rutherford for their second four-year term. On January 18th, it was the deadline for the governor to submit his budget bills into both chambers. Legislators can only cut the governor's proposed operating budget in the state of Maryland. They cannot add to it or move funding around. Yesterday, the governor delivered his State of the State address. On February 13th, we will be having DD Day in Annapolis. On February 21st, we'll be having Catholics in Annapolis, or Lobby Night. On March 18th, it will be Crossover Day. That's the day that the House of Delegates and the State Senate send each other their bills that they plan to pass. On April 1st, both chambers should pass budget legislations. And on April 8th, it will be the conclusion of the legislative session. The regular session will end on April 8th. That's so we only have from now until April 8th. It's a very short season. On May 28th, it's the deadline for the governor to sign or to veto bills. Legislation passed by the General Assembly that he fails to address becomes law without his signature. And on July 1st, it's the date for new laws dealing with the budget, taxes, or revenue. Those would take effect on July 1st. And October 1st will be the date that all other laws go into effect. Some of the information that we're going to be sharing with you today was also shared last year for our 2018 legislative session webinar. The reason for that is that much of the legislation and decisions that were made from past years, and particularly last year, continue to impact this year's legislation. An example of that is the 2018 tax bill. Please note that many of the links and the resources that we will discuss are saved in the handout section of this webinar and are available for you to download at any time during this session. Let's have a look at a video that helps us to understand just who and what we are advocating for. For those of us that advocate on behalf of, and for the countless self-advocates that do a fabulous job advocating for themselves, just like Maddie. So let's meet Maddie.
In an ordered and productive community, it is a fundamental principle that every human being is a person. Pope John the 23rd, Pacem in Terris.
My name is Madeline, and my friends call me Maddie. I have gifts just like everybody else. I like to be with my friends, talk to them on the phone, get on Facebook and talk to them, go shopping, and being with people.
When Madeline was born, the geneticist arrived from Children's Hospital, and he verified the diagnosis. He said, "You have a little girl with Down syndrome." And he said, "And now I'm going to tell you what we need to do for her." He was so positive because I've heard such stories from people that when they got that diagnosis, they just said, you know, your baby won't be able to do. And he was the complete opposite.
If he was at the Horizon Center last year, he would have seen me because I brought up the gifts for the Mass. When I brought up the gifts, it made me feel good about myself because I got to give a gift to Jesus.
By reason of their baptism, all Catholics are equal in dignity in the sight of God and have the same divine calling. Sacramental guidelines for persons with disabilities.
In my baptism pictures, I am the one in right because in baptism, you are cleaning you with no sin off your soul.
About 2 months after Madeline was born, we decided that that's when we would have the baptism. And she was baptized at our parish church, St. Jerome's, and that's where she joined the church.
I went to a Catholic high school, and I liked being there all 4 years because I had a lot of friends, fun teachers, and a lot of fun subjects.
No child should be denied his or her right to an education in faith, which in turn nurtures the soul of a nation. Pope Benedict XVI.
Somebody at church actually asked us, what is Madeline going to do for high school? And we said, well, we're not sure. We think, possibly, it's going to be public school. And they said, well, there's somebody with Downs at Holy Cross. And I thought, there is.
I am now in college, and I have a lot of friends, great subjects I'm taking, and when I graduate from college, I hope this might happen, but get a good job of being a pre-K teacher, because I like kids.
People with disabilities have the same duty as all members of the community to do the Lord's work in the world according to their God-given talents and capacities. Catholic Bishop's Pastoral Statement on Disability.
I have a life just like yours, and I can do as many things as you can. I see my family, I keep in touch with my friends in college, I go to the beach, I like to swim, dance, knit, sing, and play the piano.
So Madeline has a life just like any other young person. She has broadened what I understand as the body of Christ. Madeline is just one part of this large body, and we need each other to make that body of Christ.
Research indicates that 90% of pregnant women receiving a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome decide not to carry their child to term. 9 out of 10 say no to life.
If you trust in Jesus, He will show you the way to a better future and to show you that life will be hard, but we can get through it.
God's unconditional love, which bathes every human individual, points to a meaning and purpose for all human life. Pope Benedict XVI.
My name is Maddie, and I have a life just like yours.
It's very difficult to argue with such a very real and personal story, isn't it? There is legislation that we can advocate for to support persons living with disability. Or there are many self-advocates like Maddie that are doing a fantastic job with that themselves. But also, there are ways that we are called to advocate within our own parishes as well. Today, we're going to be talking about state legislation and advocacy. So why is advocacy important? The DD community in Maryland is one of the most effective in Annapolis. The numbers of turnout for DD Day and the presence that the disability community provide make this community a visible sign of the way of the many different lived experiences of the people here in Maryland. There's creating legislative change. These voices and stories that we are talking about today, like Maddie's, do create change. There's the budget and the right buckets for ensuring that through the budget process, we allocate monies to disability supports. And there's regulations. We can engage in the conversation and be part of the plan. And policy changes, our presence and understanding do indeed impact policy change, which is very important for all of us to remember. There are some perceived barriers out there that we can talk about and then hopefully dispel at the same time. What might be some of these perceived barriers? Some might feel as though trying to advocate is just a waste of time. I'm just one small voice in a large sea, and so what I have to say isn't that important. That one person can't make that much of a difference. Or even that I don't have enough knowledge. I don't know the way the state government works. I don't know how all of this works in our Maryland legislative sessions. I'm not sure I have enough knowledge to contribute. In truth, however, we're all advocates. Each of us, whether being a self-advocate or a person that advocates on behalf of others, play a very, very important role in how the legislation moves forward, and that our interests are special. There are indeed aspects of the lived experience of living with a disability that are known only to persons living with disability and their families. And so the voices of those persons become all the more important to tell that first person story, to make that understanding clear and known to our lawmakers. And our lawmakers do want to hear from you. They want to know that first person story. They want to be able to understand that story through first person accounts and what their experiences are, either in education or in employment or in housing or in all those many different areas where decisions are being made. And indeed, you are the expert in those areas. You are the folks that are walking the walk and talking the talk and fighting those battles. And so the lawmakers do want to hear directly from you in what your lived experience is of living those issues. So how can you contact your elected officials? How is that possible for you? There is a website, which is marylandelect.net. If you were to go to www.mdelect.net and put in your address, you'll find out who your elected official for your particular geographic area is, or who they are. There could very well be more than one for your area. It is really important that you mail, call, fax, into your elected officials to share your lived experience and to make known what you want your elected officials to vote for. Always, always, handwritten letters with real people stories are the most effective in getting those stories across. In handwriting a letter or typing a letter and actually putting the letter in the mail, include some pictures, include some things that make your story real to your elected official, does make a very big difference. Additionally, you can go in and visit. Your elected official will have an office in Annapolis, but also when they are in the off session, they have district offices where you could go and make an appointment and speak to your elected officials one-on-one. They are there for you, and they have a great interest in speaking with you. It is often easier to get an appointment in the off season. It's very busy during what is a very quick January to April legislative season, but you have the whole year to make an appointment and go in and talk with your elected official. And I know it makes Rachel crazy when I'm always referring to my apps, but there is an app for that. So if you would like to download the Verizon VC Maryland Government app, on that app, there is a way for you to track bills, and there's a way for you to find your elected officials, to find out what hearings are happening on what day. That's all available in an app.
And Mary, I always like to share that during a recent visit I had with one of our elected officials, it was mentioned that handwritten letters always rise to the top of the mail pile. So even in this age of a lot of different ways to communicate, including social media, the handwritten letter still has a lot of power, especially with our elected officials. So don't hesitate to write those letters, take the time, perhaps if you wish, to include a picture of yourself if you're a self-advocate or your loved one. It really does make an impact, and it does, as that person pointed out to me in Annapolis, those letters do go to the top of the mail pile. So don't hesitate. We've also heard feedback before regarding those types of form emails that you might see coming through your inbox. Again, it is one tool in a toolbox, but even personal stories, again, trying to avoid those form email letters. Again, that's what the elected officials want to hear from individual people and hear their stories.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for that. We'll have an opportunity as well to gather as a group in Annapolis during the legislative session. We have 2 opportunities to be there together. The first one will come up on February 13th, which is Developmental Disabilities Day at the legislature. Such a difficult time with that. The link to register is there. However, we do want to share with you that DD Day is now full. We're thrilled that DD Day has become so well attended. This does mean that currently there are no longer spaces at the briefing before folks are invited to visit their representatives. Please know that on February 13th, you can still make an appointment and visit your representatives on that same day. Please let us know if you wish to go, and we would be happy to share the materials that we are preparing for the folks that are attending with us, so that you can have some talking points available to you as you go in to see your representative. The second opportunity will come on February 21st, and that is Catholics in Annapolis. It's also known as Lobby Night. And the information to register for Lobby Night or Catholics in Annapolis is there on your screen. Note as well that in the attachments section, the handout section on the sidebar of your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a sheet with all of these links so that you can click on them directly to register for these events. the impact of the 2018 tax bill on support agencies is one of the areas that we were discussing at the very beginning of this webinar, that although it was a federal bill of last year, the rollout and the impacts of this bill are still being felt now. So although this federal bill did pass last year, here are some examples of how they are still impacting us this current year. There will be a notable decrease in charitable deductions. Currently, 46% of Marylanders itemize their deductions, and this is forecast to drop at least 19 points. With the changes to the amount of the Maryland taxes, now capped at $10,000, being able to deduct on federal taxes, it will be less monies for the state budgets and restrict the ability of the states to raise additional revenue. And really, the greatest impact to our communities are the cuts to Medicaid, or what we perceive could be the impending cuts to Medicaid that will impact the federal budget from these tax cuts. They're looking to $1 trillion over the next 10 years as forecasted cuts. These are not yet known entities, however, and still being decided.
So as Mary mentioned, services provided through the Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA, are funded through medical assistance or Medicaid. So these services are matched with Maryland state monies by federal monies, approximately $1 to $1. So it is a very important way for Maryland to serve people living with developmental disabilities. What are some of these services that are provided? Employment training, so people living with developmental disabilities can be employed and continue to receive supports to ensure their employment is successful, or job coaching. Also, people to support an individual living with developmental disabilities to live independently, perhaps helping them to prepare meals, food shopping, money management. All these types of support services require staff. And of course, those funding for those services are again provided through medical assistance or Medicaid. Those all-important respite services that help families to continue to care for their loved one in their home. So we know families do need to take breaks and do need to have time off from caregiving. So again, this is another example of those types of services provided. And of course, we cannot forget that a person is a whole person, and they also want to be in the community, connecting with other people. And again, those types of services are funded through medical assistance. And we will continue to discuss throughout this webinar the home-based community services ruling, which requires service providers funded through the DDA to ensure that persons are connected with their community. And again, these types of services require staffing, and they require funding for those. So as Mary just mentioned before, when those cuts come to Medicaid or medical assistance, that does impact the community services that are provided for persons living with developmental disabilities. So when those massive cuts happen, that will greatly reduce the number of new people that are going to be able to receive services, because that will severely impact the amount of new money that's available for Maryland to continue to create those independent lives for people living with developmental disabilities.
And as Rachel just mentioned, the Maryland implementation of the HCBS ruling, or the Federal Home and Community-Based Service ruling. Here are some of the ways that is going to affect us here in Maryland as well. So the home-based community service ruling is going to move the service ratio, which is now somewhere around 1:6, to a 1:2 or 1:3 ratio. With the area of housing, it is to move from an institutional setting to community group homes. So here in Maryland, you might think, well, aren't we already there with that? But in the state of Maryland, we still have 2 institutions open. One is on the Eastern Shore and one is in Western Maryland. Integration into the community, as Rachel was saying, how very important it is for persons to be connected to, engaged with, and part of their local community, which would mean ending sheltered workshops and moving towards jobs or volunteer opportunities that are out and within community settings. Remember, when we say community settings, our parishes could be beautiful opportunities for that to happen, to be engaged within their community and helping out, volunteering. There's always something to do in the parish office, so there's one opportunity that might fit for us. Person-centered planning would be empowering persons with disabilities to direct their own care plans, and how important it is for persons with disabilities, self-advocates, to be able to say what it is they are interested in, what area of work they would like to. Maddie shared that she was very interested in working with young children. To be able to follow what your likes are and what your interests are, to make the time that you have in your day really the most gratifying to you, and to bring out all of those gifts that are very unique to you as well. The state of Maryland has pushed back on the date for the final rule. Implementation was due to be finalized here in 2019, but that deadline has been moved to 2022, noting that we weren't quite ready to embrace all of the different supports that were within the rule. 2022 might seem like that's been pushed so we can take a sigh and take our time here, but really 2022 is but a moment around the corner, and we really do not have an awful lot of time to get all of these different aspects of the HCBS ruling in place. It is not a very long amount of time. So there's a lot to be done in a short amount of time to be prepared and ready for this. The legislative priorities in 2019, what you see here are the priorities that have been identified for this 2019 session. And for more information on these priorities, or to receive alerts and updates, here are 3 websites that would have that information for you. The Arc of Maryland Public Policy Platform, the Maryland Developmental Disability Council Public Policy Platform, and a third option, the Maryland Association of Community Services, or MACS, and their bill chart for 2018 is available. 19 is not yet there, but they will update as things go along as well.
And we are suggesting today these 3 sources for information on the legislative priorities for the state of Maryland. But if you do receive services, or your family member does, through a provider agency, you might want to check with them as well on ways or other suggested sites they might be familiar with as well, in order to get all the possible information regarding those upcoming bills and legislation. But as Mary mentioned, here are 3 very excellent and reliable sources, and they do continually update them as different bills are being presented, or any quick changes that might be proposed.
And as to those quick changes, There is a Word document in your handout section that we encourage you to download, and go ahead and just click on those links. It is a Word document, so you're able to just click right on the links. And by doing so, you can sign up for the alerts that come. As Rachel mentioned, things change very, very quickly within the session. So keeping up with the most updated information is always a moving target. There's a lot happening. Most of these updates are done on Fridays, just so you know. So the legislative priorities for 2019, some of those include those that you see here. Funding for community programs, the waiting list, transitioning youth, education and children's services, employment, affordable housing, law enforcement and justice, and civil rights. For us as well, physician-assisted suicide will be something we will be watching very, very closely here in the state of Maryland. There will be a bill proposed soon. It has not yet been proposed. This particular list that you see here was taken from the Arc of Maryland's legislative priorities. So how you can follow the current legislation here is what the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, what their policy and legislation website looks like. And as you can see here, there is a red click on for the public policy reform and what the session reports are all about. You can click on these, and they are updated on Fridays. The link to this, again, will be in the attachment that we have in our handout section, but this is just so you can see what that looks like, and where, when you go onto the page, what you have to click on to assure that you are getting the most current information. Again, the updates are done on Fridays for this. So specific legislation to watch in 2019. We are going to have a look at a few specific areas. Of course, it's not possible to touch on all in such a short amount of time, but we thought we would just pick a few, but then encourage you to follow along throughout the legislative session and to contact your representative to let them know how you want them to vote on these various bills. You may also wish to pay attention to when the budget hearings will be taking place on some of these bills. We have that information on some that we'll be talking about this morning, and others we do not have. That specific information is not yet available. So let's have a look at our first area, and that would be physician-assisted suicide. As you may have known, just the other day, there was an alert out that this will be proposed. This bill will be proposed in this 2019 session. It was not brought up in 18, but it had been brought up in previous years. While lobbying against physician-assisted suicide during the last legislative session, we learned here in the department through conversations with our county representatives that many of the legislators had not made the connection between disabilities and the dangers to decision-making and undue influence from others. I think it was kind of a very eye-opening experience for Rachel and I to have conversations with many of the county representatives who weren't thinking this was really a disability-related issue at all, when in fact it has a very profound impact on the most vulnerable among us within the disability community. There is a need to create more awareness within the disability community regarding the dangers of what is being called the End of Life Options Act in the state of Maryland. The Arc of Maryland, it is important to note, has included this in their current platform for 2019, and they are openly opposed to the End of Options Act. which is very good news for the disability community within the state of Maryland. Also very important to acknowledge is how very important faith-based service providers can be as truly the natural leaders in spearheading the creation of creating greater awareness within the families that they support, that this is indeed a very real threat to our communities. For more information and for the most updated alerts and information on this very important topic, you can visit www.stopassistedsuicidemd.org. Again, the website here in Maryland is www.stopassistedsuicidemd.org.
So one of the major legislative priorities, again, in the state of Maryland is continuing to preserve and increase funding for the waiting list for services through the Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA. And there's many different types of waivers that are available to people living with developmental disabilities in the state of Maryland, also including children and adults. So what are some of the goals of these waivers? As we mentioned, it's a way to offer services, including employment and supporting families. Other ways are to have personal support services, as we mentioned. So that would be helping someone to shop, helping someone to navigate the community. And again, it also can fund assistive technology, including iPads and other types of ways to communicate and to be organized. And of course, for some people we support, they may need specifically behavioral support services. Again, this helps the person to be included in the community and supported. And there's also opportunities for people to self-direct their services, meaning they can have, and with their help of their family members or other people, have a say on how their day is going to look like and the way that they want services to be provided to them. And this includes that flexibility, as we mentioned. So if your life circumstances change, as they do for all of us, you can have that ability to move money around. And of course, the newest waiver, which is the community support waiver, right now is capped at $25,000. And again, this is to help people living with their families to be fully integrated into the community. So if you went on, again, the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council website and you looked at their section regarding Governor Hogan's proposed budget for fiscal year 2020, which, again, as Mary mentioned, this budget cannot be cut or money moved around for services once the budget is proposed. It's very difficult to change. But if you looked on that document, you would see the different funding amounts that are allocated for people on the waiting list with the Developmental Disabilities Administration. And for example, there's about $5 million proposed budget, which will serve approximately only 173 people on the highest level of need, which you might hear this term called crisis resolution. So that $5 million will serve only 173 people living in the state of Maryland. Currently, there are 4,700 people on all the waiting list for the DDA services. So again, we want to advocate that those funds are preserved for the different waiting lists and the different people that are anxiously waiting services. So we can see already that it will not adequately cover all those waiting for services, but definitely we do not want to see any cuts to those variety of waiting lists that are available. And again, if you go to the Maryland DD Council website and look at the proposed budget, you can get very exact figures on that. and see where there is that great need. So this is where advocacy really comes into play.
For our young people and our students, we have something that is called the Boost Bill, broadening options and opportunities for students today. So the Boost Bill is something that we have had here in the state of Maryland now for a few years, and the Maryland legislature has expanded the educational options for income-eligible students. The program provides tuition and assistance scholarships to students to help them attend non-public schools best fit for their educational needs. So for the fiscal year 18-19, the state of Maryland allocated $7.6 million for scholarships, and it is likely that many new scholarships will be awarded. And additionally, students with special learning needs will be given additional scholarship awards. Within the $7.6 million, there were some $2.3 million that was allocated last year for special needs students. So during the 2019 Maryland General Assembly session, state lawmakers will determine the allocation for the 1920 school year, and the Boost Scholarships Coalition is currently awaiting the governor's proposed budget, which is now in, which will include his proposed funding for this program. Many of our Catholic schools are now receiving Boost Bill funds and are doing absolutely amazing things within their Catholic school settings for students that are eligible for these funds. So we're thrilled to know that the Boost Bill is helping and supporting students in Catholic school settings as well.
So one of the major legislative issues that will be during this session in Annapolis will be, as we can see here, House Bill, or you'll see HB, House Bill 0166. Or you might hear Fight for 15, as it's going to be commonly known. This would enact a state minimum wage to increase over time up to $15 per hour. And this is kind of in response to a lot of the area that we live in here in Maryland, the DC metro area, where we've seen those minimum wage rates be enacted to $15 an hour. So now, why is this an important issue for the community, the developmental disabilities community? One thing, of course, is that we want people with developmental disabilities to have real jobs with real pay. So, of course, we want them to be paid for their work. But also the impact specifically for the developmental disabilities community involves the wages for those direct support workers, those all-important people that provide those day-to-day supports. So in the past, the developmental disabilities community would like to see wages rise for everyone, but what we need to advocate for is that the Developmental Disabilities Administration budget be adequately funded and in fact receive increases that are allowed for those support workers so that they can receive above the minimum wage. So you can imagine that if you received only the minimum wage for a job, that's very difficult to provide that direct support work. It kind of results in a high turnover. And in fact, already in Maryland, there's a 45% turnover for those direct support service workers. And you can imagine that individual impact it has for people that they constantly go through staffing changes. So when you hear this minimum wage bill, make sure we are including that advocacy for increases to the DDA budget to allow for people to be paid above and beyond that minimum wage. And we also see other support agencies, including nursing homes and people providing direct services to those living with mental illness. They do want that minimum wage increase, but what they're requesting is hey, we want to get more money in our budget so we can pay our workers, which are professionals, more than the minimum wage.
Affordable housing. Here is yet another one that really does impact each and every family at one point in your journey as a family together, or you as an individual. So to increase affordable and accessible housing so that people with developmental disabilities or other disabilities can live within the community. As we had mentioned a little bit earlier, there are group home options. There are still 2 institutions in the state of Maryland, but what we really see as a great need is to increase the accessibility of affordable housing so that folks are able to live within the community that they wish to live within. Accessible housing includes physical access, yes, but also access to transportation for jobs and additionally social opportunities so that it is a well-rounded and full life with all of the access that anyone would wish to have that well-rounded day in, day out, weekend, looking forward to the weekend fun type experiences. We'd like to mention one example that is very unique here in Maryland, and that is the example of Main Street. Main Street is an inclusive, community-centered residential development, the first of its kind in the Washington metropolitan area, where there are 25% of the apartments designated for adults with disabilities. So this is a very exciting project that is happening and being developed right now. For more information, you can go to mainstreetconnect.org. Again, the website is mainstreetconnect.org to learn more about this very exciting project right here in Montgomery County in Maryland. Please remember as well that much of the advocacy around affordable housing truly does start on the county level. Be sure that you are also paying attention to what affordable housing possibilities are happening right there in your own county, right there in your own community. Because as we hear over and over and over again, all politics is local. Well, here's a perfect example how, yes, indeed, all politics is most assuredly local.
And another bill for us to be strongly advocating for and also contacting our representatives for is the Patient Bill of Rights, again, House Bill 0145. And this requires hospitals to provide those patient bills of rights in an accessible way. And we'd like to mention here not only talking in terms of languages, but also for persons in our deaf community, that they receive adequate American Sign Language interpretation. So you can imagine if you're a person who's deaf and you've just arrived at the hospital, and perhaps you even lost your glasses or other type of thing might have happened, of course, on the way, and you did not have any access to an in-person sign language interpreter, how frightening that would feel for you or your loved one. So this is definitely a bill we want to advocate for. And again, this is an example where things cross over in different ways. And we really want to make sure that everyone has access to those bills of rights and that they can understand that in a way that works for their communication style.
And here's a Senate bill that we can look and monitor, and that's the Community Colleges Services Senate Bill 0812. This would be requiring that Maryland Higher Education Commission to consult with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges when establishing a certain review process and adopting certain guidelines or regulations for a grant program for supplemental services and supports for students with disabilities in our community colleges. So that would be in the fiscal year 2021, and the ask is that the governor include in the annual budget a bill with a general fund appropriation of $2,500,000. So that, of course, would be a grant award that would allow students with disabilities to be included in the life of our community colleges across the state of Maryland. One very important thing to consider as we're thinking about this exciting bill, which will be a great point of access for our students, is that it's not only about the courses that you take and being on campus to have access to the academics, but we also have to think about, as we look towards this grant, ways that we can be, and that these students can be involved socially as well, so that their experience there on campus, just like any other college student's experience, is well-rounded, with access to academics, of course, but also access to the social feel and stream and flow of campus life. This would also broaden opportunities for future employment for students that are able to pursue career opportunities or areas of interest that would require them to have higher education to access those goals. So there are many wonderful opportunities available through Senate Bill 0812. So closely monitor that one as well.
So as we saw, there are ways for you to advocate, and please remember you are the expert, and also specific bills that we can monitor here as residents in the state of Maryland, and ways that we can ensure that people living with developmental disabilities and their families have a full life. But this means that us, as in our Catholic community, that we're embracing all persons and families. That is supporting a culture of life when we embrace everyone and really look to the whole lifespan of the person. This allows not only us to be transformed, but we are mutually transforming other members of the community. And we can recall that our own Catholic social teaching calls us to move beyond our walls of our parish, if you will, to truly be advocates and voices for change. That is what we are called to be as Catholics.
So we'd love for you to dare to imagine. As we take a look at what this could all and does look like here in the Archdiocese of Washington, we ask you to take some time to submit any questions that you might have in the questions section where it says chat on your GoToWebinar control panel. If you look down, there will be an area that says chat. Please submit any comments or questions. And after we watch this short video, we will look to any questions or comments that have been submitted. We'll respond to all that we have time for. And Rachel, did you also have a few announcements that you would like to make?
Yes, thank you, Mary. So our next webinar actually will be scheduled for March 14th, again from 12 to 1. We will not be having a webinar in February due to the Mid-Atlantic Conference, which we will all be attending. So our next webinar will be on March 14th, and we are daring to tackle the topic of friendship and dating. So please look forward to a very lively discussion on that topic. Of course, all of us want to be loved and valued. So what does that mean for our community that we support? So again, that will be on March 14th. And please, again, save the date for April 6th, which will be our day of reflection for individuals living with disabilities, their caregivers, families, persons who are deaf, where we will take that time to reflect and to be with one another. That's going to be April 6th at St. Camilla's Catholic Church.
Fabulous. So let's give you a few minutes to submit any questions or comments as we watch this video together, and we'll come back to close with any questions or comments that may be posted. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and remind you that in the handouts section, there are 5 attachments there. Please do download the handouts that are there in the attachments section. And additionally, if you are interested in receiving talking points for attending DD Day, although the session is closed, the morning briefing session is closed, there are no seats, we'd be delighted to help you with talking points. So please email either Rachel or myself to let us know if we can help you with talking points for DD Day. We'd be thrilled to pass those along to you. As Rachel mentioned, we look forward to seeing you again in March with our hot topic of dating. And we also hope that you can join us for our April Day of Reflection and Family Retreat.
Thank you, everyone, again for joining for our webinar today. And please, again, also email us on any topics that you might like to see on a future webinar.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and stay warm.